Welcome to the show there. I cover all kinds of species from largemouth, smallmouth, walleyes, and pike, muskies, and carp and suckers, catfish, perch, crappies, ones like that. Yeah, that sort of thing. Uh, if I have a chance, maybe I'll do some other shows like drum and all kinds of other species as well, and that sort of thing like that. Do temu and dollar store testing of all kinds of stuff and that. And like I said, it's multi-species and that sort of thing like that. I'd give you hot fishing tips, also multi-species tournament champion and multi-species master angler. So you get also some tournament tips and things like that. Fished over 1,100 of them, so a long time that I did it from the 60s. I started actually fishing contests before Bassmaster started. So that's how long that I was in the game, right? And that sort of thing like that, and extremely successful and that sort of thing like that. So, but anyways, I'll cover that kinds of stuff. But this show, um, we cover all kinds of stuff. I'll cover like bait casters from Temu that are low budget and things like that, even from dollar stores spinning stuff, fly fishing and multi species. Also have older rods and reels from the 60s that I'll take on from, ones of today, all kinds of stuff like that. And many kinds of patterns, everything from, any kind of family of bait you could possibly think of, from spinner baits. I'm a real spinner bait lunatic, so I do a lot of shows on those and show you some outside tips that others are never showing you and things that I've came up with over the decades, right? And I won piles of tournaments with spinner baits, especially Titanic ones and all kinds of things, right? So I'm a real spinner bait nut and that sort of thing. The next show or the one after, I'll be actually showing people that how you can get limits of big walleyes with spinner baits when they're not even known as a spinner bait. So, like as a bait for walleyes, you almost zero will see mention of such a thing, right? And that, but I catch limits doing this all the time with them, and I've been catching monstrous walleyes since the '60s with early Shannon twin spins, beetle spins, ones like that. I like beetle spins a lot. Excellent walleye bait as well, and that sort of thing. That so I cover a lot of different things on these shows and stuff like that, from historic things to today, some monster fish tales here and there, all kinds of stuff. But anyways, like and subscribe, be nice. And that I recovered from several surgeries here and that sort of thing like that. And each episode is different. It could be any species, whatever is available to me that I can put together the quickest, right? So, and you get, like I said, some odd fishing tips from the leper Scott. He's part Irish, part Scottish there. So he's got the luck of the leprechaun, but, the tenacity of a Scotsman and that sort of thing, right? So, a hardcore fisherman, right? So anyways, stay tuned. This year's show there, we're going to be testing all kinds of ones. Here's a fairly cheap one. They're making it look like it's graphite, but it's actually a fiberglass of some kind of composite in that. Testing a bunch of dollar store and Timu sort of baits and things like that. And you'd be surprised some of the monster fish I catch with some of them and that sort of thing like that. Some different fishing line here from Mako and different ones, some deep divers for muskies and bigger pike and giant bass and that sort of thing like that. We got glide baits and swim baits and all kinds of stuff going on here. So a little bit of everything. So we'll test some of them out, some jig heads and that sort of thing. So stay tuned. This show there, we're going to be covering carp fishing 101. I've been carp fishing since the 60s, as you can see here. A tiny kid, I won tournaments in Illinois, Quebec, Ontario, and that sort of thing like that, doing this sort of a thing. And so I was doing it way before, like, in fishermen didn't even start mentioning this to North Americans to the 80s, and that's way ahead of a time of even famous legends like Kevin Maddox and these kinds of ones. I've done it way longer than them and gotten way more fish because, like, in the English market, they do a lot of mistakes with this hair like rig like principle, and I'll show you rigs that are identical that I was already used and appeared in newspapers with, sort of thing before Kevin Maddox's air rig. It's identical rig. Somebody asked me a name, and I came out. I just called it the mini maxi rig because it was a tiny hook and a bigger hook that's up, like a big regular hook, and then a trace material of invisible thread, 2, 4, 6 pound line, and tiny microscopic English hooks, and I'd thread up the bait that way. It's the only difference, and I'd pop them up off the bottom before, and pop ups didn't come until years after the hair rig was, sort of already published out of this. So it's not true, this kind of information and that sort of thing like that. There's numerous kinds of things that I've seen over the years that, are actually not factual at all in the slightest and that sort of thing like that. So, uh, on this episode there, I'll cover some of the sort of basic things, all the kinds of things that you'll be, basic needs of carp fishing and that sort of thing like that. I'm going to be covering bag sticks and rod pods and different kinds of hooks that you can get from Temu and dollar stores and things like that. Hair rig like sort of things that was actually called a different sort of name, mini maxi rig, and that sort of thing like that. And I cover particle baits, even fly fishing for them, which I've been doing since the '60s as well. So a long time, like massive decades before you saw any of these kinds of things in it. I sold them for a living, right? And that sort of thing like that. Every single day, I lived on what I called the tri waters, where I could reach three different bodies of water within a certain distance and actually get there quite quickly and cover over 100 species that's available to me, right? So but the main, how I bought boats and things like that at first, besides winning fishing contests and that, is actually selling carp, right? So, I was doing it way, 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 way before, these articles ever started coming out and things like that. And that's, so I cover a lot of history of that sort of thing like that. And that's so, we cover all kinds of different things. And one of the major things, that the reason why a lot of North Americans don't catch a lot of carp is because they follow this hair rig like principle. And I'll cover some of that sort of thing. There's way more ways, as the old saying goes, to skin a cat, right? And that sort of thing like that. So, but anyways, I'll cover everything for you: European bite alarms, all kinds of different things as we go out throughout the series. The first show, I'm going to actually mix two very smaller shows and then a larger one sort of together, because the first one, I had all kinds of problems with Temu cameras and that, and including one I'm going to show you. What happens with a lot of them, they have this adjustable head on it that you can put the angles, and what happens is all the time the thing will just move on its own, walking around or moving, and you don't realize this. You put it on and you think you're filming straight looking at the fish, but actually the eye is up, looking up to the sky or different things, right? So it's very annoying. Almost every model, their clips bust off, all right? So I'm not going to talk a lot about the video cameras of Timu and how many problems that they got, because they seem to all have the similar like sorts of problems where whoever designed them didn't really isn't thinking that much, sort of thing like that. So, anyways, I'll give some suggestions for that as well. That maybe if enough people write in, that somebody with a brain will, make it proper, right? It's so simple, to they over make these an issue by doing all kinds of things and with their cheap way of putting a little clip on it. If you put it on a hat, after a couple of times it starts to bend, the camera will fall right in the drink. I lost about 7, 8 cameras, sometimes with over 20 some fish on it, where it was a good day of biting. It was a great films. I wouldn't have even had to edit anything. I could just keep it leaving rolling. There's a fish every couple of minutes, sort of thing, and they go right in the drink, right? So, so I had a lot of problems with the video cameraing and that sort of thing like that, but not as much as the fish catching, right? So, anyways, we'll cover all the kinds of different basic things about hair rigs, principles, and all kinds of different ways of doing things, from fly fishing, fishing up on the surface for them, all kinds of different things that we'll do throughout the series and that. But the first one, it's the toughest condition that my system, they actually drain the water in one of them in the winter months to accommodate for skaters and things. And it causes huge havoc on these fish. They're stuck in tiny little pools and that sort of thing. And with the introduction of zebra mussels, it cleared up the water. The carp populations went down thousands of percentage points, right? From hundreds going by your line every couple of minutes to now just once a blue moon, a group of 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, maybe at certain times of year. If they're all spotting and things like that, there might be a couple of hundred around in the area and that sort of thing, but that's about it, right? Compared to thousands in old days, right? So it's changed a lot over the ages and that, and you have to adapt with the times and the different things like that. So anyways, we'll cover a lot of different ones here, and this episode will be fishing some low water conditions. Then, when the water's filled, we're going back to a spot there, and we're going to hunt a little bit bigger carp. And then we're going to be going and doing some pond fishing for just a different visual and some fun action and smaller sorts of fish. But and then we're other ones as we go along. We'll hunt monsters and all kinds of different ways of doing it. So, anyways, we'll continue on. This is the first show that I attempted. The water was actually drained in my local system here. This is the toughest conditions. I'm using a technique called pipe piper fishing, where I put a chum from different angles in the main river channel, led them into this tiny shallow bay. There's boulders right in front of me and all kinds of things. It's a wild sort of thing where, and I'm using invisible thread, which is about a half to a pound and a half test sort of pound test line. Here's the first one I landed. Look at this. Look at how shallow this water is. And I got these guys in here, right? You can see here. Can you see the boulders out the front? This is how shallow. And I had to get this fish from the main river channel. Now, at the end, I got another monster, right? And I landed a big sucker that somehow didn't get on this film. It's somewhere else and I can't find it. But anyways, I got a big a red horse sucker as well mixed in with it, right? But I'm using little bite indicate electric bite alarm there, a typical 2 bag stick, and laying it sort of like that, so that way I can keep a very low profile to the water. There, see, so nice fish. Anyways, we'll continue on with the bigger. Okay, yeah, folks, we're into the fish here. Sadly, there was something wrong with the sound to it and that, so it wasn't working correctly. I was trying to explain to you as we just set up. It's just earlier spring and that sort of thing. The water just filled a while back. That season, it was a little bit warmer spring, so the weeds started growing already and things like that. We're battling a decent fisher, and this place is called the Stairway from Hell. A bunch of champion English anglers were here for 8 days, didn't even get one bite. So it can be a tough spot. It used to be historically great before the zebra mussels infestations and a lot of different things, but sadly, because of that, they've decreased the numbers by thousands of percentage, and also some drought years where the fish were really stuck and things like that, and a lot of them died off and that sort of thing. And so we're just bringing it in here now. So now we're into another one here, and we're testing the This is a Darth Vader lightsaber rod. Dun, 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 dun. Who's the boss? Darth Vader, of course. Right? The most terrifying Jedi of all times, right? And that sort of thing like that. Although others could argue the Emperor different ones, but I'd say he was pretty consistent, sort of thing. And that, but anyways, I love this fishing rod. I had purchased it originally thinking it'd be great for walleye and smallmouth fishing. It's fast action, about 7.5 foot on it, medium heavier sort of action to it for a spinning rod. But it's great for busting through boiled, harder paste baits, things like that, where I want the hook to bust through this stuff. We got some jackfish line. I think it was like 6 or 8 pound line, one of the two. I never go, almost never over. I'm either using 20 some pound line for, flipping and pitch and all that kind of stuff, or totally the opposite of 642 and invisible thread, these sewing thread challenges that I do. So I love battling giant fish on light line, like on this here, and that sort of thing. The reel, I forget which one this is. I think it was a Proberis one, but it's a better one. I'll show it you after. It has the handle is proper, where it actually has a real screw in it. A lot of these cheaper ones are made out of melted monofilament, actually in a mold, and with real cheap gears and things like that. And they're not that good, right? A lot of the ones, but this one was just, in the same kind of price range, but on a deal, and it turned out to be a lot better of a reel than that. And the rod certainly passes, right? So as you can see here, it's fighting it well. It can handle a little bit lighter line than what it suggests, and a bit heavier line than what it suggests, right? So I love it. I think it's a great rod. I wish it was even a one piece, but because I'm, like that, I prefer one piece as always, if possible. But I mean, two piece, the connection's really good and everything else about it, right? So it's a very decent rod all around, and excellent for even pike jig fishing, things like that, muskies, even, and this kinds of stuff, right? So pretty well across the board. You can use it for a lighter musky rod with. Yeah, like 14-pound line, stuff like that, and larger jigs, this kind of things like that. To carp fishing, right, for paste baits and things like that, right? So, you know, but yeah, as you can see here, I've been playing fish all my life like this, like monster fish on a very light line, right? So to me, this is nothing, like sort of thing. And I do this all the time. And in this approach here, because there isn't a lot of boat traffic or anything like that, they're not opening up the current. The bait's staying there and subtracting in the fish. They just filled it a little while previous, and that. And I'm using just a typical paste baits. You need to learn, that's one thing. There is no such thing as magic baits or formulas, the super Kiko Mando bowl, and all this stuff that I've heard from 10 zillion people over the years. And that, my uncle Rufus uses liver and the juice of a vampire, and all this stuff is all hogwash, right? There's tons of people in England that make fortunes selling to newbies that really believe that magic tutti frutti is the greatest on earth. But after a couple of days, these fish learn, right, and then they won't touch this kind of bait anymore. I've seen when people throw out corn and peas, different ones, as chum, the carp run from in terror, already know that this is that trouble, right? And that sort of thing like that. So I've been religiously changing bait formulas. I realize thousands of kinds of baits will work. I'll give you a list of some of the better scents and things like that. And by modifying them each time when the fishing starts getting slow and things like that, you need to start changing the bait and the tactics quite often. I use like over hundreds kinds of tactics for carp, not just bolt rigging. That's the most basic rudimentary thing that was around way before this terminology ever existed. Asians, since they've ever been in North America, were using heavy old bolts and nuts and things like that as sinkers because of poor wages and things like that. It would snag down in the bottom. The fish would pull on it. They'd use like a three-way river rig. When I was a kid, I'd see them all the time at the Rito Falls and that. The guy would have a worm, and carp don't bite on worms as much. So they didn't catch remotely as many as I would. But the thing is I would even use their same methodology, but they didn't realize that this was helping hooking the fish. They were using it out of necessity to get it down the deep current, but they'd have like a three-way river rig like thing with a basic bait holder hook of some sort and that, and then put a worm on it and that sort of thing like that. And then, when the fish would grab at it and go to turn, it would snag down there, or just the heavy weight of the bolt, it would prick him in his mouth a little bit, then they'd go flying with it, right? So that's where the English got this from, and that's where I learned it from, was originally from Asians, right? So, I mean, the guy can be all snooty poo poo, but reality, a lot of these things like paste baits were made thousands of years ago for Mashir and koi for for emperors that had them as pets and all kinds of stuff, right? So, I mean, these kinds, a lot of these technology, like methodologies, were used way before any of us were ever born, right? So, anyways, but nice fish area, as you can see here, and but a lot of people follow all these English methods with the hair rigs, and I'll show you that I had a rig exactly the same as what they call their hair rig, and that and pop ups off the bottom, and already won tournaments with them in the 70s and that, and came up with it in the later 60s and that sort of thing like that, before Kevin Maddox ever appeared on the scene using the exact same kind of rig. The only difference is I had a tiny little English hooks at the end, and I would thread up the particle baits that way or do different things, and I'll show you how to do some of those. But on this one here, it's just a basic bait holder hook and a big one of my mysterious sort of concoctions that I make. This one was called Fuzzy Peach, and a mixture of sort of peach and an old out of commissioned Star Wars cereal that is very good because it had some natural like sort of substances in it that was quite appealing to big carp. So, anyways, we'll continue on. Today's powder in there. What I used was the most basic of things here. I used some bait holder hooks from different sizes. I typically will use sometimes way smaller than that and larger, but in most of the cases, I'd say between size 14 to size like 2, that sort of range, like in that, right, is typical for what I'll use for carp and most of them. I prefer to use hardened carbon steel hooks, ones that have a good sort of thing to them and that. And with those kind of hooks, even though I tell you all the time, sharpen your hooks and that, unless you have only a few left or something like that, they're fairly inexpensive. You're better off getting another one and putting it on, right? Now, what I used was several different ways of presenting it. Either you bury the hook completely into it, no, bolt rigs here, no terminal tackle, no sinkers, no anything, right? It's just completely a slackline approach. This has been used since the time began, right? Way before my time, and monks used to do this in the 14th century, make paste baits with honey and that. And so it's an older sort of thing, right? But a lot of people go for this hair rig like stuff and that. Now, here, I'll show you right here. You can see clearly mine up at the top. It was called the Mini Maxi rig. Just somebody asked me for a name for it. I just came up with it on the fly because one hook was maximum size and the other one was mini. But you can see what I did here is I would thread up the particle baits. Sometimes I'd put a blown up piece of air injected inside of a crawler and float it up off the bottom, or pieces of sponge. I'd also use pieces of more hardened boil bait or just paste baits and put that up. But the problem is that I was using a lot of times like this invisible thread, because even 2 4 pound line was hard to get through some of these hooks, right? And that sort of thing like that. So a lot of times I'd use that. And I realized that you could actually land these Titans even with that light of line if you were careful and sort of things like that. And a lot of times I got them on the spare little microscopic hook. So it's actually a much better hook setter anyways, as far as that goes, right? But now here's Kevin Maddox's rig here, right? And the only difference, you see the loop at the end, and he's got a boilie stop, and they use a needle to thread it up. But I mean, I already want to appeared in the papers by popping this up the bottom, right, in a real spooky carp water where hundreds of contestants were all lining the banks, making noise and everything. And so I used the lightest line. I had a modified fly rod that I rewrapped to turn it into a spinning rod so it could take such light line without snapping, yeah, like just breathing on it, sort of thing like that. And I was already a deadly expert at fighting huge fish on very light line, right? So to me, this was fun, and I don't break them off and that sort of thing like that. But what I would do is sometimes if I'd be bringing him in, if I seen he wasn't on the small hook and he was on the bigger one, and he had a heavier normal main line, 6, 8, or 4, whatever it was, right? Well, then I could beef it up more and put some more pressure on this on the guy, right, and that sort of thing like that. But if you see any difference between this rig and Kevin Maddox's here, was just a different way of doing it, right? They came up with a needle later. I was just threading it on with, a small little English hooks, right? So I did get the hooks originally from English because they would use them for microscopic nymph fishing and spooky fish over in England and things like that. But you could actually land monsters with them and that sort of thing like that. So in this case, some of the fish, sometimes what I do, if you're having trouble setting the hook or things like that, with just a standard bait holder hook of some sort, that sort of thing, they work quite well. Good design to them and that they hook most of the fish that'll hit it. And that if you are missing them, what I do is I'll wrap the dough around it, have an open hook here, and maybe put some particle baits on it or a piece of worm or any kind of thing, a piece of crab dinner, things like that. That's something that will block this taste of the metal. They, believe it or not, they can smell metal, right? Like I don't know if you've ever noticed, but sometimes when you pull out like a brand new metal object, there's a smell to it, right? So I suspect that they can smell these kinds of things like that. And I already knew that the lighter line that you use, that the less they'd feel it in their mouth. So you can argue about semantics again, but I came up with this around 68. So Kevin Maddox's thing came out around 77 or something. So I already won tournaments with it. I used it for a long, long time of different variations of it. Sometimes I'd put like a big paste bait and use like not as small of a hook, just another trace hook like that, put a paste bait on it, and then put some particles to increase the profile. That's originally why I was doing it. If I wanted more bites there, I'd just lower the line test and that. And I noticed the way back when I was a little kid that you would see if the line was thicker, the guy would have trouble getting it in his mouth, and a lot of times would spit it and things like that, unless they were super aggressive sort of ones that never been hooked before and that. But more picky ones after you hooked a few times and that sort of thing like that, they'd get weird, right? So I already knew all these kinds of principles before this. Now, congratulations to him. He came up with this kind of idea independently and not knowing of my existence and me not knowing his until later, right? and that sort of thing like that. I might have seen his name because I used to read a lot like Angling Times and stuff like that, and different ones over in England. And I learned some good techniques from English, some of the earlier sort of ones, monkey climbers and some of the bite alarms that we'll go through and that. But on the first show, I just had it on 2 bag sticks with a bite alarm, but because of slack line, it doesn't work very well. And I didn't want to put it in a trick that I use that I show you on another show to prevent, so that way to make sure you at least get some kind of beep. It's better for slackline if you use the old-fashioned kind. They're harder to find, but ones with a big wire on it instead of the wheel, they pick up the slackline way better, right? And that's what I originally would use, and I like them much better, period. Like, so I'm not really a fan of these kind of wheel ones here. I find them, they don't work properly. But I figured out a couple of ways of doing this where you can use slack line and keep it in there and be able to lift it open and set the hook without the fish feeling it too much of that. Carp are very sensitive. Sometimes just even the tiniest little weight. Sometimes that's why I won't even use a toothpick as a bite indicator, because it's maybe too much. that they'll actually spin it, right? So there's different, depending on how many times the fish has been hooked and all kinds of things like that. So, but one simple pattern here, yeah, $4 or $5 worth of temu hooks and that sort of thing like that. For dough balls, one of the better ones is one that's created from Mako. It's a typical bait holder like hook. You can find them in dollar stores. They're forged and they can take a monster fish. And usually they're fairly sharp. I haven't had too many duds. I have had duds sharpened with their spinner baits sometimes, and certainly with the ball bearings that they use and other things. But I do like their model because I can fidget with it a little bit and create a different kind of better bait with it, with a better ball bearing on it, and a proper wrapping on it. So that way, if a giant muskie or pike or something, a huge bass, what have you, walleye, that instead of him snapping the arm, even if he does, you'll still be able to reel him in. Whilst with the Gookin squad and many of these others, they all fail because they make these R bends and they easily will snap after so many fish. They get weak. And they seemingly, these companies purposely do that. They put them on a sharp angle so that way casting and casting, it's bending the wire back and forth, and all of a sudden it snaps. The guy just has to go buy another one, right? It's all tricks of companies. They're out there to, mess with you and get you to spend more money than you should have. So, but here's the basics of carp. You can see that it works and that sort of thing. This has been working for centuries. Ancient, like I said, people used like for Mashir and different ones like that. A Catlo Carpio, the biggest barb on the planet, right? He's a giant monster carp. I mean, unbelievable. At one time, these fish, I'll cover them someday. That's my dream carp of all times, like a barb, any kind of minnow-like species, right? Is to hunt this dude, right? And that sort of thing. And in ancient times, they could get almost 10 feet long and over 1,000 pounds. Over 1,000 pounds. Can you imagine a carp over 1,000 pounds? Like Lake Reduta has some over 100 pounds, right? And that sort of thing like that. But these are artificially fed fish a lot, and they're older fish and they mop up everything moving, so they've gotten fatter than what they typically would in a regular environment, right? And they're old fish and that sort of thing like that. But I mean, amazing though, some of the species of carp that there's out there. There's Julian prize carp, and there's these new infiltrators here, the silver and black carp and that sort of thing like that. So a lot of different carp are out there and they're all giant minnow like guys, right? So I find them really fascinating. I love all these kinds of minnow-like species from, they used to call them the Colorado squawfish. And at one time, these dudes could get over 5 feet and over 80 pounds. I would kill to hook one that big like that. Like, I mean, that would be so thrilling. And they would bite lures and things like that, right? I caught some out in BC in a few lakes and that. And a big one there was like I got one. The thing was like about 8 pounds on it, right? And the guy said he'd never even seen one that big before, right? So I mean, at one time they used to get way bigger, but because of over damming and all kinds of weird things like that, pollution, what have you, and that, and they changed their name because they used to call them the Colorado squawfish, and because of the native connotation in that, they removed it and then they called it a pike minnow. But that's confusing because there was already a species of fish called the pike minnow, right? So they should have just, in honor of the natives, since they were catching way before we were ever around, right? They should have had like some kind of name maybe they would like or whatever, right? Yeah, sort of thing for it, right? Instead of they're so fried that they can't even think up a new name of a fish. I mean, come on. I mean, really? I don't like confusion. So the same thing absolutely hate that Canadians call pickerel like a walleye. They call it a pickerel, right? They shouldn't be calling that. There's chain pickerel, grass pickerel, eastern redfin pickerel, right? And that sort of thing. They're all pike members of the pike family, right? And they're actually a pike, not a walleye, right? Like it's completely different species, right? So they shouldn't do that, right? Like people, what a standard name for a fish should be, it should be everywhere, right? And a translation in their language, right? And that sort of thing like that, because it causes confusion, right? And that sort of thing to the average angler, right? And that sort of thing like that. But in Canada, sadly, we have very few places that have them. I've caught them up past Quebec a few times, and they're quite small. And there's some in New Brunswick too, and that sort of thing that can get fairly decent size. And over in Vermont and a few other states like that, where they can get a pretty decent size in that. So they're like a mini killer pike, right? That sort of thing like that. But I just don't like that they do that, right? Like, because it really isn't a pickerel, right? Like there's already a species with that name, right? So I wish they wouldn't do that. Is to too much confusion and that sort of thing like that, right? When it comes to that kinds of things like that, just like there's many kinds of carp, right? Yeah, king carp and all kinds of ones, leather and that sort of thing, right? So many common carp and all that sort of thing like that. So like I mean, many species exist out there. There's even a naked carp that may be extinct that lives in Nepal and that sort of thing like that. So many kinds. I would love to hunt them all if I could, because I just love them. I think they're the greatest sport fish going, right? And since I guided for decades of muskies, bass, walleyes, and what, salmon, all of the species, right? And I still say these guys are the most fascinating one out of the bunch, right? And that's sort of that. So, but next show there, we'll be covering some microscopic bite indicators, cold frontal sort of conditions. They distilled the water, and that will continue on with that and using just a slightly different methodology. Then I'll cover a whole show with different kinds of things that I'm using and that everything from boat rigs, what they call boat rigs of today, and typical hair like rigs and pop ups and bite alarms and all kinds of things as we go through the series. Sadly, this camera again, there's some weird problem with where they won't allow you to crop out that extra little space there. So yeah, I have to. Do it in some other methodology there. But one of them worked out there, I seen. So we're going to try that. The first one actually worked out correctly where I could crop it up to the full size and that. But the second film, no. Right? So, anyways, these things happen, right? So, but anyways, we'll continue on with it there. But it gives you the basic idea that you don't need a giant budget here to catch monster fish and that sort of thing like that. But if you see any really difference between that, I was using invisible thread, which is the same like his hair like sort of thing. 2, 4, 6 pound line is about the max I would use as a trace material. Sometimes I covered up all of them just to increase the profile. So the hook and the length of that and the little baby hook down at the bottom, right? And that sort of thing like that. Or sometimes I'd put like a couple of boilies and then just some particle baits down at the end. And once there's a while, I'd still hook them on the tiny little hook, right? And that sort of thing like that. So, I mean, it's really the same thing here, right? And this was already understood that the lighter the line, they didn't feel it in their mouth as much. So, yeah, no offense to him, he came up with it, on their own accord, sort of thing like that, not knowing of my existence. But I was already doing it a long time with them, and I sold them for a living every single day. I would fish for them and catch 30 to 50 and sell them, and then go back to regular fishing, right? It was that fast. It was the world's fastest carp fishery, right? At one point, right? So, anyways, we'll continue on, but you can clearly see a lot of times people with the boat rigs and all the fancy gear, you don't really need this. You can slay monsters with just the most basic of sort of things there. So stay tuned. Those synopsis there, the mighty Darth Vader lightsaber rod passed magnificently, reeling in the mooses and that sort of thing like that. It's a very nice for a two-piece rod, especially. It's very sensitive, fast action. You're able to use it for multi-species here, an excellent jig rod, that sort of thing like that. But also you could use it for like even particle baits and things like that. You don't want to like if it's smaller stuff where and it's looser particles that'll easily tear off. It's better this rod for more of a like a stiffer sort of baits, right? Like that sort of thing like that. That you want to sock it into them, right? But it'll pass like even some lighter stuff you can get away with it for and that sort of thing like that. So This has been I wear the magic ring of King Solomon production. By the way, I'm not Jewish or Islamic or any of those sorts of things. I just simply, I love history from ancient giant fish tales to magic rings and all kinds of stuff. So I like Lucky Charms and that. And throughout the same day, I might remove one dragon bracelet and put a new one on, or different things. Like I'll do weird stuff like that because I like Lucky Charms and that, and being into history and that. And so many cultures and people mention this mighty ring, right? That maybe it really existed, right? So, anyways, who knows? But anyways, if so that's the reason it's a good luck charm and that sort of thing like that. So remember, keep our waters clean. It's terrible the pollutants that these people are throwing in more and more and more in these major cities, and eventually these fish. I'm seeing dead fish sometimes now that they're not that old, and there's no real explanation as to why they should be dead, right? Because they're eating garbage up off the bottom of some toxic thing. People are throwing their batteries in there. Who knows? Like all kinds of stuff, right? Like, and ladies of the night with certain, you know, all this stuff is going in there, right? So, like, I mean, so if King Solomon had been running the things, I'm sure it wouldn't be as none wise as what we're doing it now, right? So, so keep it clean, or these poor mermaids here, their hair is going to turn green, and they're going to turn into the green-haired canal lady, a suitable wife for the Incredible Hulk and that sort of thing like that. So, you know what? These cutie pie redheads and blondies there, and the different ones getting, turning green and that sort of thing like that. So, but anyways, the hooks, the line, the jackfish line, everything's passed. So it passed across the board there and that like that. It's a very simple pattern, using old paste spade here and that sort of thing like that. The first show I didn't use any sort of bite indicators or anything like that, but so quite often I'll do that way too, and different things like that. But I cover that throughout the series of different ones. So part two here will be coming up. I'll release that very soon. And then we'll be moving into the downtown hoods, doing some early spring fishing again with some base baits and particle baits, but we're going to be using microscopic bite indicators, and I'll show you how to do that, and that sort of thing like that. Then we'll be moving over to some ponds, and then eventually we'll be chasing monsters a little bit later and that sort of thing throughout the series of that. And I'll do probably just a few shows of explaining all the basics of the things of the terminal tackle and things that you should have if you want to be a really successful carp angler and that sort of thing like that. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Click like and subscribe, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.